Okay, so let me bring up my warm-up slide here. So on Monday, we started talking about China, shifted gears to a new topic here. We talked about the first 3 Chinese empires. But today, our learning target here, we're going to explain the rise and control of the Mongols in China. So they are going to be the next group of people to take over China after the Song dynasty that we talked about on Monday. So we'll talk about kind of who they are and what sort of empire they put together and how they controlled it. So that will be our focus for today. We'll have a warm-up question here, but it's going to be on Pear Deck, which we'll get started here in a second. But before we get to that, just again, kind of some housekeeping stuff here. Under the homework tab, make sure that the test and the project have been turned in. So I sent emails out to the students that I did not get the test from yet, but otherwise the test is in the gradebook. So you can check that out. Overall, I was really happy with test scores. I thought it went really, really well. It seemed from the feedback I got too from Monday, that Google form, that for the most part, most people were okay with that type of test. Not a whole lot of people said that they absolutely hated it, so that's good. It was a little bit different, but I think it went pretty well. That being said, though, I am going to offer test corrections again like I've done before, but they're going to be a little different this time, considering the test was a little different and considering that we're going to be staying virtual over the next few days. So how I'm going to do test corrections is they will actually be tomorrow, and they are going to be in an optional class. So tomorrow at 9 a.m., I'm going to post in Google Classroom a link to a new Google Meet, and that's where you're going to go if you want to take advantage of test corrections. So remember, this is optional. This is an extra, I'll call it a bonus class tomorrow that I will host. So what I'm going to do in that bonus class is I'm going to go over the test. So I'll click through the 5 questions and I'll kind of discuss what sort of answers I expected and kind of some of the common mistakes that people made on the questions. And then I'll discuss how you can actually make up points. So if you look at your test score today and you aren't happy with it, then you can wait for tomorrow, and we'll have this bonus class at 9 a.m. that you can log into and earn some of those points back. So, yeah. So I know this is on a day that we don't normally have class. So there is the possibility that you can't make it at 9 a.m. Luckily, it's about the same time that this class starts anyway, so that is useful for you guys as well. But if you want to do this but cannot make that meeting time, let me know. But otherwise, I'll expect people that want to do test corrections to be in that class tomorrow at 9 a.m. with the Google Meet link in Classroom. So, are there any questions here about that? About test corrections? Okay, cool. So let's go ahead then and we will get started with the Mongols. So we're going to be using Pear Deck here again. So I'm going to open this up. All right. I am actually going to do this as well because I think this is going to be easier than you guys typing in the code. I realize there's this button here that says give students a link. So I'm just going to put that in the Google Meet chat, and you should just be able to click that link, and it should put you right into the Pear Deck without having to type in the code. So if you go to the Google Meet chat, you'll see that link there. Yeah, it looks like it's going way faster. We're able to sign in here. So go ahead and click that link. Should have about 20 of us or close to. 19, 18 of us. All right. How many people? Minus 1, 2, 3. So we should be about 16, 17. All right. Cool. So let's go ahead then and jump into this. So start. So on Monday, remember we had started by talking about the Silk Roads, right? We talked about the trade routes between China and Europe. And then we talked about the importance of Buddhism during this period of disunion, this lack of control. And we had watched that video about kind of what Buddhism is and how people found peace in it. And then we talked about the first 3 dynasties of China that we are covering, the Sui dynasty and their major achievement, the Grand Canal. We talked about the Tang dynasty, kind of coming up with a lot of those inventions that we've talked about of coming out of China and coming to Europe. And then we talked about the Song dynasty with the scholar officials. Did I hear a question? You don't have to write anything down right now. Nope. There will be questions to answer on the Pear Deck, so you don't have to write them down. So, and then we ended on, this was the last thing we had looked at. Remember, we had looked at kind of the negatives coming out of the Song dynasty, these cultural changes, such as foot binding were kind of these horrible practices that were being forced on people. We had talked about that. So today, where we are starting, we are going to be talking about a group called the Mongols. And a lot of times the Mongols are associated with this term barbarian. So our warm-up question here that is on your Pear Deck slide, you can go ahead and answer. What is a barbarian and what do you think of when you hear the term barbarian? Let's go ahead and take a minute here. Answer that question here. All right. Looks like most of us are getting our responses in here. So, are there any volunteers here that would like to raise their hand and answer the warm-up question here, as we've done in class, but we're doing it virtual now? So there's a raise hand button on the Google Meet. Does anyone want to share what they wrote here? What is a barbarian, or what do you think of when you hear barbarian? Hey, Ashton. Ashton, go ahead. Okay, gotcha. So you said someone that like doesn't belong in a group, and you think of Pirates of the Caribbean. Good, I like that. I like your thinking there. Good. Autumn here in the chat, you said someone who doesn't belong or an enemy belonging to a tribe or a community. Good, I like that thought as well. Somebody who doesn't belong or an enemy. Those are both good words here. Let's scroll through some of our responses here and see what else we said. So we had doesn't belong. Barbarian is someone who attacks a lot of things. Someone with battle axes when I think of barbarian. Yeah, good. I think that's what a lot of us will probably think of, right? Someone who attacks other people, an invasion, invading other people. Good. Uncivilized or a violent person. Yeah, definitely goes along with barbarian. Someone from a really long time ago, and hunters relied on survival skills. Like a wild human, a big dude, 7,000 700,000, 700 pounds. Crazy person. Good. Uncivilized. Uncivilized. Yeah, that's a good word too, is uncivilized. I'm seeing from a few people. Primitive, violent, doesn't belong. Good. So yeah, barbarian tends to kind of be this term that means somebody who, I like that term, uncivilized, right? Somebody that tends to attack other things, doesn't necessarily belong, and just are kind of a violent type of people. And so this group of people that we're talking about today, the Mongols, are often referred to as barbarians. They're often referred to as this group of people who often attack rather than talk. And we're going to look today and see whether that's a fair sort of comparison to make for somebody to the Mongols, whether they are actually barbarians or not. Good. So the Mongol Empire here, also called the Yuan Dynasty, which we'll talk about in China here in a second. But what we're going to do is we're going to watch a quick video here. It's about 5 minutes. That's going to kind of introduce you to the Mongols a little bit. So you might have heard of their leader that it'll talk about, Genghis Khan, before. But if not, it'll kind of give you an idea of how he came to power and what sorts of things he was famous for. And so while you're watching the video, I want you to kind of think about that definition of a barbarian and then answer in the Pear Deck here. Do you think that the Mongols were barbarians? So because the sharing doesn't really work very well, or the screen share doesn't work very well for videos, we'll do what we did on Monday. I'm going to put the link to the video in the chat. I'll play it still on my screen without sound, but you can watch it here on your own, this 5-minute clip. And then once it's finished, you can answer the question on the Pear Deck here. Based on the video, do you think that the Mongols were barbarians? So I'm going to hit play on mine. I don't have sound on, but I have the subtitles on. But you can watch it on your own so that you can have sound. So. All right. So video should be finishing up here. Oh, Ren, we are in Pear Deck. Couldn't think of the word. There's the code here in the corner here. So go ahead and take a minute here and answer that question on the Pear Deck if you haven't already. Based on what we've seen here so far, just that kind of brief introduction, do you think that the Mongols were barbarians? All right. Looks like answers are starting to come in here. So, any volunteers here want to answer? What do we think? Or are the Mongols barbarians based on the definitions we talked about before, or what are our thoughts here? Any volunteers that want to speak here? Ashton, you said not really. Okay. Anybody else want to chime in here? What are our thoughts? Can go to the Pear Deck as well here. Autumn says, not sure what you mean by that, as in yes. Like, Yes and no. Taylor, why do you say yes and no? Lauren says they captured people and took over territories. Zoe agrees. I said, yeah, if somebody doesn't do what they want, they kill them. Nadia, yeah, that's definitely true, right? It's not a very civilized thing to do to, attack people if they don't do what you want. Taylor says yes, because they had good war ideas. Definitely, right? Their whole kind of civilization was about taking things over. But no, because it sounds like that's all because it sounded like it's all they did. Alex said, I said this, they did sometimes, but they did like a lot of non-barbaric things, like not killing and letting them keep their religion and make good trade routes. Good. I like that thought, Alex, that they definitely had some war tendencies, but once they took over places, they were fairly peaceful. Autumn said they're violent, but they were doing and how they is low-key smart and good way to survive, but not really because they are surviving to them. It's not wrong. Good. All right. So I like our thoughts here that, it's kind of tough to label them as barbarians and uncivilized when they did have some of those good aspects, like allowing religions to stay, but also, kind of just attacking people tends to give you this idea of being a barbarian. So let's take a closer look here at how they kind of took control. I'll talk kind of about some of the things they mentioned in the video, and hopefully it'll kind of paint a better picture here of who the Mongols actually were. So as it showed in the video, the Mongols are going to take over an absolutely massive empire. So they start roughly around here-ish, where my cursor is. Kind of hard to tell without the lines. But under Genghis Khan, so that first ruler, he takes over this darker red area, and then under his ancestors, they're going to take over this outer edge as well. And it's the largest continuous land empire that's ever existed, which means it's the most amount of land controlled by one empire that's all connected in all one piece. It's bigger than the Roman Empire had been. It's bigger than, Russia is today. It's absolutely a massive amount of land that the Mongols were able to control because of their kind of prowess with war. So Genghis Khan translates to universal ruler. So it kind of talks about in the video how their goal was to take over the entire world, essentially. Whether that was possible or not is debatable. But they believed that their god had chosen them to rule everything, to be this universal ruler. And so because of his battle tactics, his strict discipline, he was able to keep control of the areas that he took over and control his military quite easily. So there he is. There's Genghis Khan. What a good looking dude he is. Can you believe that he was a fierce warrior? I can't. But hey, the history's there. So some of those battle tactics here that definitely kind of give them the label of barbarian here, because they had a lot of these battle tactics that especially Europeans at the time and even today would kind of see as almost kind of like playing dirty, I guess, not playing by the rules or playing fair. But I guess when it comes to war, I guess it doesn't really matter, right? Because if you win, you win. So one of those tactics was faking defeat. So pretending that you lost, and then when your enemy kind of puts their weapons down and start to celebrate, that's when you attack them. You know, not the most honorable thing to do, but you know, it works, and so it allows them to win. They also were incredibly brutal in their fighting and would burn down the towns that resisted them. So if people tried to fight back against the Mongols as they invaded, they would just burn the city to the ground, kill all the inhabitants, regardless of whether they were warriors or not. And then what they'd actually do is they would keep one of those people alive. So they would, you know, destroy a whole village, keep one person alive, and then they would send that person up to talk to the next town, to kind of tell the story of what happens when you resist the Mongols. And so a lot of times when the Mongols got to the next town that they were going to invade, the next town wouldn't even try and fight back because they had heard what happens when you resist the Mongols. They'd heard that everyone dies and the city gets burned to the ground. And so, you know, a very brutal tactic, but a lot of times it actually helped them avoid more fighting because people would just give up rather than fight back against the Mongols. So it's some of these battle tactics here that will give them that name of barbarian. They were also nomadic. I talked about this as well, that they were always moving. It's how they were able to control such large areas of land because they had what are called yurts, which are essentially tents, but you could set it up in just an hour or two. It could also fold up and fit on your horse so you could take it with you to the next place, so that they never had to settle in one spot. They could just kind of stop for the night in different places and set up camps. And so, as we saw on the map, over about 20 years, Genghis Khan rules until his death, and they control much of northern China and Central Asia. Now, this one's just kind of a fun fact that I like to throw in here about Genghis Khan. Very interesting that Genghis Khan had a lot of descendants. Like, he had a lot of children. He had like hundreds of wives. And it's to the point where a lot of people actually can trace their heritage back to Genghis Khan. So if you actually ever do one of those like 23andMe or Ancestry.com DNA kind of tests and kind of see where you're from, if it ever says Mongolia, there's a good chance you're related to Genghis Khan, because about 1 in 200 people can trace their heritage directly to Genghis Khan. And you can see on this map here just some percentages of places in Asia. In Mongolia itself, about a quarter of the people today are in some way related to Genghis Khan because of how many ancestors he had. So just kind of a fun, interesting fact here about him. So in 1227, they divide the Mongol Empire up into 4 regions, each ruled by one of those ancestors or one of those descendants of Genghis Khan, and they ruled the whole empire here. So We have a true or false question here, but I have it as an icon kind of drag symbol sort of idea here because you might say it's absolutely true or completely false. But based on what we've talked about so far, do you think Genghis Khan and his descendants are examples of absolute monarchs? So we talked in our last unit about absolute monarchs in Europe, like King Henry VIII or King Louis XIV and XVI. Some of us answered that question on our test about what some of the characteristics are of an absolute monarch. So go ahead and drag the symbol. Do you think that Genghis Khan and his descendants are an example of absolute monarchs? Autumn, turn in the test today. Okay, that's fine. All right. Let's take a look here. We've got our symbols here. We've got a few people towards the middle, but it looks like we're trending a little bit towards completely false here. We got a lot of people going towards that end, but a couple people have put absolutely true. Interesting. Anyone want to weigh in here? Why did you put your symbol where you did? Any thoughts here in the chat for why we put either false or true or somewhere in the middle? What do we think? All right. Alex says absolute monarchs, and one of the things they do is regulate religion, but they let them believe in any religion they want. Yeah, good. So remember, absolute monarchs control the church in Europe, especially, King Henry VIII was a good example of that. But here in the Mongol Empire, they let them keep their religions. So that's not necessarily an aspect of an absolute monarch. Good. So that's a good thought. So Alex, you probably put yours somewhere either here or on completely false. Good. Anyone else want to explain why they put their symbol where they did? So just kind of talking here about where you could have put your symbol. So Alex gave a good reason for why it could be false, but I also think that there's definitely some things you can put for true, right? So kind of along the same lines, you could argue that they did rule by divine right. The video had talked about how, the universal ruler, they believed that their God had given them the right to rule everything. So that's kind of an example of divine right. So that might be a reason you put it in true. They did also control a lot of aspects of their citizens' lives. And they also did pass their power on through bloodlines, which is an example of an absolute monarch. So there are a lot of reasons why you could have put it on true as well. So we're going to take a closer look here at their rule, actually specifically in China in a second, and that might kind of lay things out a little more too as to where this belongs. But good, interesting thoughts here. So, as we kind of have already mentioned, that once they took over a place, though, they kind of stop falling into that definition of a barbarian because they were very peaceful in the places they ruled. They tolerated local beliefs and way of life. They had religious tolerance. So even though they were brutal in taking them over, they would let you keep your religion, which is kind of interesting, right? They said the reason they took over places is because of their religion. But then they let people continue to practice Islam or Christianity or whatever religion that they were practicing at that place. They even allowed local rulers to stay in power as long as they paid a tribute, or basically a tax, to the Mongols. So if you had like a ruler of your small tribe or of your city or of your town, that person could stay in charge. They just had to pay a tax to the Mongols to, prevent them from taking you over completely. So fairly peaceful once you were actually under the Mongols' control. So a question here, why would it be beneficial for the Mongols to rule these conquered areas peacefully? Why is that a good thing for the Mongols to let them keep their religion or to let them keep their local rulers? All right, got a few answers in so far here. Let's take a look here at what people have written so far. So people would work with them. Yeah, good. So maybe prevent them. So to not spread fear, so the area they've taken over, don't try and overthrow them. Yeah, you want to prevent, you take over somebody, you don't want them to immediately try and kick you out again. So they maybe were trying to work with them. Good. They wanted it to seem like they were nice, but not be mean and bad. They just wanted the land. Yeah, good. So that they wouldn't turn on the government of the Mongols. Yeah, they wanted to maintain that control. Places they ruled won't rebel and fight back. Good. Took their homes. They wouldn't want to fight back. Good. That's just how they live. They wouldn't overthrow them to work with them. Yeah, exactly. So that's pretty much right. The benefit, right, is that if you allow them to keep their religion and you allow them to keep their local rulers, their basic day-to-day life isn't going to change. And so they will be okay with the Mongols being in charge. So they wanted to kind of prevent people from overthrowing them. Good. So we're going to finish out today talking about Kublai Khan, who is going to be the ruler of China. So under the Mongols, they managed to take over China, and for the first time in history, and it has basically not happened since, for the first time, China was being ruled by somebody not from China. So Kublai Khan was Mongolian. He was the grandson of Genghis Khan, and he was going to be the next leader. So to kind of gain the loyalty of the Chinese people that they were taking over, he did some of those things that were on the previous slide, right? So he let them keep their religion. He let them keep their way of life. And even he went so far as to adopt some of the Chinese ways of life into his own. So he was very interested in, their architecture and their art, and allowing them to flourish in that. He also really was into the fireworks that they were creating, so loved that and kind of adopted that into Mongolian culture as well. So here's Kublai Khan. Looks very similar to Genghis Khan. He is related to him, but they look pretty much the same. So under Kublai Khan, this is in the 1200s. So this is around the time of the Crusades. And as we talked about in the Crusades, trade with China was starting to pick back up. And so Kublai Khan was helpful in making that happen by allowing foreign merchants to come into China. He wasn't closing off the borders or anything like that, and allowing travelers and traders to come in. Probably the most famous is a name you've probably heard of, is a guy named Marco Polo. He was from Italy, but he comes to China and actually becomes friends with Kublai Khan, makes it into his court and talks to him, and brings back some of those products back to Europe. So lots of foreign trade here between China and Europe at this time. We're going to skip that. But just as quickly as it started, Mongol control of China deteriorated. So Kublai Khan was a very well-liked ruler in China. You know, he was increasing trade. He was letting them keep their ways of life, all those sorts of things. But when he died, unfortunately, the Mongols didn't have a good way of passing power on. They didn't directly give it to the oldest child of the ruler. They allowed other people to kind of fight for it, and because of that, they aren't going to be able to hold on to control of China. So the Chinese people wanted, they liked Kublai Khan, but they wanted control back under Chinese control. And so once Kublai Khan's gone and that fighting starts, they will be pushed out. So our final question here, kind of getting back to our learning target here, we were talking about explaining the rise and the control of the Mongols in China. So our final question here, do you think the Mongols were effective leaders in controlling the lands that they took? So think about how they controlled their land and what sorts of things they did. Do you think they were effective? Why or why not? So I'll give you guys a minute here to think about that, and then we'll look at some responses. All right, let's start taking a look at some of our responses here. Yes, because they let them do their things that they would normally do, but they just wanted to, get as much land as possible. But they maybe didn't have as good of a government because they lost that control. Good. Yes, because even though they were barbarians, so still kind of thinking of them as a barbarian, they were peaceful and smart. Good. Expanded the area of what they ruled exponentially. So yeah, they were effective in taking over land for sure. Largest land empire of all time, and they let people how they wanted to, so definitely kind of effective in that. They were good leaders once they took over land. Yes, good. They took over land and are very powerful. Good. They allowed them to keep their same practices. Yes, because they were popular. Yeah, good. So yeah, I definitely think you can make the argument that they were effective leaders when they actually kept control, right? Once they lose that control, once they start fighting over who's going to be in control next, that's when the whole thing kind of falls apart. But them being effective, I think is definitely an argument you can make. And them controlling China, even for the short period of time that they were there, is still pretty impressive considering they were an outside group of people that managed to kind of win over the control of the Chinese people. Excellent. Good. So that is it for today. We'll have some participation points for participating in the Pear Deck. So I appreciate you guys for participating in that. Otherwise, just remember, as a reminder here, if you wanted to do test corrections, let me go back to the slide that has it. Remember, I'm going to post for an extra class tomorrow at 9 a.m. if you wanted to do those. That's optional. You don't have to come to that Google class, but I'll go over the test, talk about some common mistakes, and give you a chance to make some points up. But otherwise, I will see you guys on Friday. So I hope you guys have a good Wednesday. Thanks. Have a good one.